Categorical analysis of immigration consequences. Non-citizens can be deported or suffer other serious immigration consequences because of criminal convictions. These consequences often include deportation and can sometimes be surprising in their severity and disproportionality, and it's not always intuitively clear when they will be applied. To find out whether a conviction will trigger immigration consequences, you have to look to the Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA, the Federal Immigration Statute, and see whether the offense of conviction falls within any of the categories in the INA that trigger deportation or other consequences. The next question is how to determine whether an offense falls within one of these categories. To do this, courts use a categorical analysis. This means that the judge compares the elements of the state statute of conviction with the elements of the federal immigration category to see if the state elements are a match for, or if they are included within, the elements of the federal category. In other words, does every violation of the state statute necessarily involve a violation of the federal offense or fall within the federal category? If so, the state statute is a categorical match for the federal category, and immigration consequences will be triggered by the state conviction. On the other hand, if the offense of conviction criminalizes a broader swath of conduct than the immigration category, then the offense is considered overbroad. An overbroad offense is categorically not a match for the federal offense and can't be used to impose immigration consequences. The categorical analysis does not consider the facts of what the individual actually did. The actual facts of the case are irrelevant to the analysis. The only question is whether the minimum conduct required to convict someone under a particular offense necessarily meets all the elements of the federal offense category. The Supreme Court recently reaffirmed the categorical approach in a case called Decamp v. United States. Here's how the court used the analysis in that case. The first step was to define the elements of the federal offense that provided the standard for triggering federal consequences. A federal offense may be a statutory or a so-called generic offense, and you may find the elements in a federal statute, in case law, or even spelled out in pattern jury instructions. The key is to identify the elements that a jury must agree upon in order to convict someone of the offense. In the Decamp case, the Supreme Court was analyzing the federal generic offense of burglary. Federal case law defines the elements of generic burglary as an unlawful entry into a building or structure with the intent to commit a crime. In order for a state conviction to trigger federal consequences as a burglary offense, the state offense would have to meet all of these elements in every case. In Decamp, the Supreme Court compared a California burglary statute that had the elements of entry into certain specific locations with the intent to commit theft or a felony. The Supreme Court focused its analysis on the first required generic federal element, unlawful entry. There was no requirement under the California statute that the entry be unlawful. For example, the state statute covers an individual who lawfully enters a store but has the intention to shoplift there. The court found that the California statute prohibited all entries as long as there was a larcenous or felonious intent, regardless of whether the entries were lawful or not. As a result, the court concluded that the first state element swept more broadly than the corresponding federal element. In short, it was categorically overbroad because the element of entry, which was not divisible, criminalized behavior that would not be prohibited under the federal definition. Because this element was overbroad, the court concluded that the California offense, even though it was called burglary, did not qualify as a federal burglary offense and did not trigger the additional federal consequences for a prior burglary conviction. The court made a point of emphasizing that it did not matter what Mr. Decamp had actually done in committing the crime. The question was a categorical one based on the elements of the state offense. In Justice Kagan's words, the key is elements, not facts. The court pointed out that this emphasis on elements is the same even for statutes that are divisible into alternative sets of elements that constitute different offenses, though courts can use a modified categorical approach to identify the relevant elements in those cases. But that is a topic for another time. The court's analysis in Descamps is a perfect example of the strict categorical analysis. If an indivisible element of a state offense of conviction is broader than its federal counterpart, a conviction for that offense will not trigger the imposition of additional federal consequences.